Good morning. We're at the Parish President's Advisory Committee on Permitting and Planning, October 2nd, at the East Bank Regional Library. And this is to call the order. Roll call, please.
If you're filling in for a member, please state your name. Stacy Alessandra. Here. Rusty Autry. Jerry Bologna. Here. John Cerruti. Here. Jeff Charlet. Adam Chimner. Donovan Duffy. Bob Grace. Here. Brian Lade. Here. Ruth Lawson. Here. Jim Martin. Here. Chance Miller. Frank Morse.
Bruce Snyder here, Frank.
Will Place.
Here.
Charles Silbernagel.
Here.
Peter Sparrow.
Here.
Bert Turner.
Present.
Vincent Vestola.
Here.
And we have
Any corrections for the minutes from the September 4th meeting? Hearing none, minutes stand approved. Our first item of discussion is the updating on the permitting and planning consultant lead study. And Juliet?
Good morning. We just wanted to provide a brief update on, as we mentioned at the very first of these advisory committee meetings, we have two consultant-led studies of our permitting and planning efforts underway. The first is the permitting ordinances. Barry Dunn has been selected to do that work. We are expecting the agreement to be on the October 22nd council agenda, and then that effort to get underway soon thereafter. This is specifically looking at our permitting ordinances as it relates to the building code and application. Among the scope of work that is proposed by Barry Dunn does include at least one meeting with you all in your role as advisory committee members, but I expect that there may also be stakeholder interviews and other opportunities for you all to provide input to that consultant-led process. The second one that we wanted to provide an update on is the Unified Development Code Comprehensive Update. Camiros was selected at the September 17th council meeting. Again, we expect that agreement to be on the October 22nd agenda, finalizing that. As a reminder, this is a comprehensive update to the entirety of chapters 33 and 40, which are currently our Unified Development Code and the zoning code, consolidating it into one single code with all of our development regulations. And this morning, we actually have Arista Stringies with Camiros here to provide a very brief overview of the scope of work. This is a project that will take, at a minimum, probably 2 years. And then she will actually stay on the line and listen to the rest of this meeting as it relates to the planning department's introduction of some potential interim standards related to the UDC rewrite. So give me a second. I'm going to figure out how we switch back over to getting Arista on screen. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. I don't know what I'm sharing now. All right, Arista, it is all yours.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for, giving me a couple minutes here to speak about this project. As Juliet said, I'm Arista Strungis from Camiros, principal and partner in the firm. I've led the firm's zoning practice for well over 25 years now, and very excited to be back working with Jefferson Parish again. I can't see any of you, so maybe I might be familiar to some of you. I did work with the parish on the industrial zoning update, as well as the conditional rezonings. And, one of the things I discovered while working there is that you've got these two codes going on at the same time. So it's a very exciting project to kind of bring everything together to create a code that's more efficient, consistent, and predictable, and not kind of sitting in two different places. A really brief overview of the scope. It's really a three-phase scope. Makes it sound simple, but it's not. The first phase is a lot of information gathering. We'll be doing things like stakeholder interviews, online surveys, touring the parish to kind of look at the actual physical conditions, kind of seeing all of the industrial, kind of everything else that's in the parish area. And really coming back to the parish with a framework report that kind of outlines everything, the different approaches, the concerns, the issues, ways to potentially resolve those so that everybody can see in that first phase the direction that we're headed in terms of kind of updating the Unified Development Code. Again, there will be multiple opportunities of public participation in that first phase. And then that leads into the second phase, which would be the actual drafting of the code, starting with an internal draft that I have to work on and then kind of working with staff to get that fully fleshed out. We see a very robust participation process as part of that as well, typically in an open house format, both on the East Bank and the West Bank, providing numerous opportunities for input, and then again, kind of working through, another draft that really shows kind of how the changes have been made. And then finally, what really sounds like the simple one, but never really is the adoption phase, which is kind of obviously taking it through the appointed and elected officials to finally get the UDC in place. So like I said, this is a very exciting project. Having worked in the parish on the consultant side of things, obviously working with these codes, I understand kind of intrinsically some of the difficulties in having things in multiple places. And for me, it's really exciting to be part of something that I've always said in all these projects, hey, you guys can't keep working under two codes, we got to bring them together. So really excited to be part of that, and thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. And if anybody wants me to ask me anything, I'm fine.
Thanks, Arista.
No problem.
Are we going to take questions now, or? Okay, does anyone have any questions about the process for Arista?
If you do, when you use your table mic, push the button to switch from red to green.
No? No questions? All right, great. Thank you, Arista.
Thanks.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm here. Okay. Let's see. Arista, can you see the presentation?
Yes, I can.
There it goes. All right, sorry about that. Good morning, everyone. I'm here briefly to discuss the interim standards that we sent out to everyone with the agenda. And we're going to do this in three parts. I'm going to take the first part, and then Amanda's going to take the second part, and Elena will take the third, and we'll go over that. So for a recap, at our last meeting, planning identified some speed bumps and then some action items that we had worked through to help reduce some of those speed bumps. As an example, some of the code amendments that we're looking at in the future, some potential changes to our notice requirements, looking at reducing the number of zoning districts that we have, consolidating our design districts, ministerial exceptions in the review process, and then also the thresholds for compliance for site plan review. The purpose of the interim standards that we're going to discuss today is to sort of test a few of those items that we've worked through, both from beginning, from before, prior to the inception of this committee, things that we've just discussed in our ongoing meetings, and then some things that have come out of this committee. So we're going to test a few of those with these interim standards and see how those could potentially work. So before we get into it, how can you help? We've sent the draft for everyone to review. If you have any suggested revisions, if you have any questions, please go ahead and reach out to us. We can try to address some of them at this meeting, but we do have a limited amount of time. So if there's something that you really want to discuss in length, please let us know. We'll set up a meeting. We'll work through it. If there are regulations that we didn't address in there that you think maybe could be addressed with some interim standards. At the end of the presentation, we're going to have some email addresses. We'd really prefer that you send those regulations to us in writing so that we can review them and then get back to you in writing. We like a written record, and we like to give you reasons if we think maybe it's not something we can do at this point in time, or we think maybe it's something that won't work. We'd really like to provide that information to you in a written format so you have it for your records and we have it for our records. So as Juliet mentioned, the council did select a consultant. We are in the contract negotiation phase at the moment. Our intention is to have that contract ready for the council agenda for the October 22nd council meeting. The resolution with the study call for these interim standards that we sent out to you and we're going to discuss today, that resolution we don't see going to the council until the December 10th council meeting. So we do have a little bit more time to look at those standards and work through them and meet with anyone who may have questions or maybe some suggested revisions. So as most of you may know, in order to undertake a study of the zoning ordinance or the UDC, we do have to call a text study. So that's what we'll be doing with these interim standards. They'll be part of that text study. And the text study will cover the Code of Ordinances in general, but specifically Chapter 33, what is our Unified Development Code now, and then Chapter 40, what is our zoning code. In addition to the text study, we will call a map study or an area study. And we need that in order to remap any of the zoning changes that may come out of the text study. For those of you who were involved in the industrial districts, you'll remember that we had our old industrial districts, which were M1, M2, M3, and M4. When we did the study, what came out of that were new industrial districts, the IMU, the mixed-use industrial, the IL, IH, and so forth. So in order to map those, because the M1 and M2, M3, those no longer existed, we had to call a map study, an area study, in order to put those new zoning districts in place. So those are the two studies that we'll be calling with that. And then the interim standards will be established with the text study, and then of course we always include the language providing for related matters, just to address anything that we may not have seen coming. So, oh, I'm sorry, John, yes.
Sorry, I thought that moved. Could you give me one example of like what in the chapter, was it 33? I think it was on the previous slide, 33 or 40, that, like what would be one example of something y'all could change in that would make things better?
So I think when we get to the interim standards, those are kind of the things that we'll be looking at to make it better, but really the entirety of the text for 33 and 40 will be reviewed and updated. But can we discuss in the interim standards? Because those interim standards are things that we're putting in place because we feel like that would help make things better. I feel like I'm not answering your question.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, it might be my misunderstanding. But I would just look, because I mean, chapter 40 is zoning, right? So that's like
Yes.
C2, and this is the things you can do, and this is the setbacks and all that kind of stuff. So like, what would you change in that
Sure.
that would make things?
So-
Or am I jumping ahead? Is that the problem? I'm
A little
sorry.
bit. That's okay.
I'm
That's
sorry.
okay.
I can back.
Very quickly, I'll go through our methodology for these interim standards that are in place. I will note interim standards are temporary, so we, under the code, we're only allowed to have them in place for a total of 18 months. Originally 1 year, and then the council can choose to extend them for an additional 6 months. So a potential total for 18 months. The methodology that went into the interim standards that we're presenting to you today, this is the research that we did prior to bringing these standards to you. They're not cold, we didn't pull them out of thin air, right? We reviewed feedback from this advisory committee, all the meetings that we've had here, everything that has been said. We take that back to the planning department and we discuss it in length. We have met bi-weekly with senior staff in the planning department to discuss the issues, both issues that were discussed here and then issues that the planning department notes when we're going through our processes every day. We reviewed drafts and we also went through past cases, what worked, what didn't work in some of the cases that we've had. We ran test cases with these interim development standards. That's really something that we like to do. We either take an application that we have currently in the office, or if we have a pre-app meeting with someone and they're proposing a certain development scenario, we run that through these interim standards to see where the gaps are, to see where the issues may be, so that when it gets time to actually implement them, hopefully we're ahead of the curve and we've addressed everything that we can to ensure that it's a smooth process. In addition to that, we've met with other parish departments, we've met with building permits, we've met with code compliance and enforcement, we met with engineering, we met with parks, the parish attorney's office, to go over these draft standards, again, in depth, in length, discuss them. What are some of the gaps those departments may see? What's something that may not work for them? What's something we need to add so that their processes can also go smoother? So I think this is getting to your question, John. We've sort of put these interim standards into 3 different categories. The first is the speed bumps that we discussed at the last advisory committee meeting, things that slow the process down for the planning department. Streamline site plan review for one. So you asked specifically about Chapter 40, John. We have CPZ and MUG. We have 2 different design standards in Chapter 40, and they have 2 different sets of regulations. Some of the regulations are similar, but some of them are different. But the design standards are meant to accomplish the same goal, which is to make the parish look nicer, to increase the landscaping within the parish, to hopefully invite more businesses in. But why do we have 2 sets of regulations to do that? Because then I have a planner who has to go to the CPZ maybe for one site plan review, but for different, they have to go to the others. In that instance, what we found is that leads to confusion, it leads to a loss of efficiency, things can slip through the cracks. That's one thing that we've identified to increase efficiency, move this process forward, kind of get rid of one of those speed bumps. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, streamlining our site plan review by combining the CPZ and MUC so that we just have that one set of regulations. We've also looked at revised parking requirements. I'm sure for everyone in here, parking requirements can be a pain. Our parking requirements are outdated. I think they're still from the 70s. So we're looking at revising those to, again, remove one of those speed bumps that we've identified in the process. And then we're clarifying some landscaping provisions. We've had a couple developments come through that had questions, and some of our landscaping provisions we found and they found weren't clear enough. And we don't want that to be a continued speed bump, so we want to clarify those provisions, make it easier to understand, and hopefully that will help the process, make it more efficient. The second category, we have dated Euclidean zoning regulations. They are very strict and very siloed. So in the C2, you can only do these uses, period. And those uses haven't been updated in a minute. That sort of zoning tends to be very inflexible and maybe doesn't address all of the development scenarios that could work in an area that was zone C2. So for those dated zoning regulations, Elena is going to discuss today a new process that we're hoping to introduce called conditional zoning. And then she's going to discuss the potential for accessory dwelling units, or what are commonly referred to as ADUs. And then the last category is just miscellaneous. And we're going to clarify some regulations for certain permitted uses that we have in there now that aren't as clear as they could be, and then updating section references, which is an ongoing thing. Did that?
No, I understand. Thank you very much. No, this is a little bit different.
Okay.
I mean, I know we talked about, like, is there any chance of reducing some of these, like just, like combining them, like CPC and MUC, that makes a lot of sense. But just, you know, getting rid of some, like, that comes from the state though, or?
So I think that question is kind of nuanced, but I will say that's always on the table. And maybe it's not necessarily getting rid of some regulations, but just making it clearer, easier to understand. And then that, again, reduces those speed bumps that we have. But if there are certain regulations that you want to discuss
just,
further.
Well, one thing that comes to mind, Vincent loves, is the water fountain. You know?
The water fountain?
That's a building code.
That's
That's a building code.
I got you. Apparently, sorry, I wasn't understanding.
Oh, okay, yeah, well, yeah, I mean, that's a little bit right, but for example, things that, like, you know, don't really make sense, or, you know, I don't know, I just, you know, just thinking about how to make things easier.
Sure.
Obviously, the more, like we talked about before, the more regulations and more landscaping and verifying refrigerant, you know, they just keep adding, and it's just gonna it's
No.
gonna make it take
So
longer.
I think it should be made
Like all they
clear.
do is add, but they never take away.
Sure.
From my opinion,
From
I'm
your-
not
I know.
an expert.
No, I
that works in
understand.
this department.
I'm sorry? Yes, oh,
So, John, to your point, you were talking about two different things. And something we often talk about, and I think that the chairs are going to talk about this a little bit at the end of the meeting, is there is the building code requirements and how Jefferson Parish administers the requirements of the building code. That is going to be evaluated by very Dunn consultants. But there is also the zoning regulations that are geographically defined, right? Where your property has C2 zoning, has R1A zoning. That is the UDC rewrite that Camiros is doing. And so the idea, yes, is that eventually we are addressing all of the regulations that apply to development, but they will be falling under two different processes. And what we're going to be doing our best to do is to make sure that those consultants are also in conversation with each other so they can understand that impact. When we talk about what changes in the building code and how the building permits department administers that, but there will be things like that are building code standards as set forth by the state of Louisiana that we cannot amend or do away with as an independent jurisdiction. The zoning regulations, however, those are completely within our authority and control of the parish council as the legislative body of the parish. To that question, yes, all of the zoning districts that currently are in place will be up for and part of this discussion. That's one of the reasons why we're so excited about this, is because we've never had the opportunity to comprehensively look at the whole. Often, these studies that Ms. Martin referred to are, we're going to look at whether or not we allow Taylor and Milliners in the GO2 zoning district, right? It's a very specific thing that gets looked at. But do we ever think about or have the opportunity, and opportunity is really the right word because this is a significant undertaking, to look at, do we need specific regulations regarding Milliners and Taylors in the general office zoning districts, right? Or is there a better way to figure out where those uses are allowed? And so those of you who participated in the industrial zoning district study, as Ms. Martin said, the old zoning districts completely went away and brand new zoning districts went into their place. Some of the provisions remained the same, but a lot of things got updated, a lot of things got revised to meet modern uses, to develop modern standards. And so,
Julia, can you use the mic?
sorry,
Thank
yes. I'm not going to repeat all that. But what I will say is, I want you all to keep that in mind as we have these conversations, is that there are going to have to be two separate and distinct processes that we invite your participation and we invite your comments and your thoughts in, but they are separate consultants who are going to be leading these efforts. And so it's bearing in mind what are things that are the building code regulations and what are things that are the zoning code regulations, and understanding where those two are separate. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think
That helps me a lot.
you're after processes of how things get accomplished, right? For, you know, through building permits and planning. How do you reduce the number of steps you need to get a permit? It's probably where you're going with this, right?
Yeah, that would be another way to say it, yeah. Yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah, right,
She's going to get into a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. all right.
Well, from the
I'll
planning
try to be
side.
quiet.
it's okay. Questions are good.
Oh, I've got a question.
Okay.
When you streamline the CPC muck are you going to rename this something else? Like, will morph into like? a-
So not in the interim standards,
No.
but I think in the
Eventually,
UDC rewrite,
when
yes.
you- When you combine the two, it'll be a, you know, snuffleupagus.
Yes. Maybe something a little easier to say, but yes, that's the intended
Okay.
direction.
Beth, the
Yes.
proposed study and the changes that are being addressed, will those end up resulting in more restrictive uses, like the industrial study was, where there were a whole bunch of uses that were restricted? Or is this just simply to streamline and clarify the existing uses?
So the main purpose, or one of the main purposes, is definitely to streamline and clarify. I mean, it will come up with additional uses because our zoning ordinance hasn't been updated it's been updated piecemeal, but not comprehensively. And what we found is that there are uses that developers want to do out there that currently aren't shown as permitted uses, and that is one of the speed bumps that we find we have. That was what we wanted to do with the industrial districts, and why we introduced the new uses is because there were uses that people came to us wanting to do that weren't addressed in the zoning ordinance, and that creates a gap there. It slows down the process because then there has to be an interpretation made and a decision as to whether or not that's permitted use in that district, whereas now we have the table that makes it clear if you are permitted use in that district or not for those laundry list of uses that we found people wanted to do.
And in listening to what you were saying, or what the lady was saying on the screen, there's going to be participation on the part of the landowners?
Yes, stakeholders, we have a laundry list of stakeholders. There will be multiple public meetings in the same way that we did with the industrial districts.
Okay, because I think, as most of us know, the bulk of available developable land is on the West Bank.
Yes.
And, changes in the zoning, changes in the building code and whatnot have a significant impact
Yes.
on the West Bank land. And the people that are doing this study and doing all this stuff to upgrade and streamline this stuff, I mean, they're familiar with Jefferson Parish and the fact that there's two sides. I mean, I would hope we're not going to make changes in a vacuum just because somebody in Chicago says, well, this is the way it should be done.
Sure. So we never make changes in a vacuum. In the same way that we did the industrial district study with the stakeholder participation, all of the interviews that we did, and the public meetings. And yes, Arista is familiar with the geography of Jefferson Parish because she did the industrial district study. Is that okay? Sure.
So I think what was helpful with the industrial zoning, like I know y'all talked about public meetings, but we had that West Bank Port Development Task Force, which the majority, I think, of the work got done because it was a smaller group. Is there an opportunity for that to happen with stakeholders? I mean, it might not be that, it's not going to be that task force, whatever that was, but I think it would be much easier than us just meeting at public meetings.
Oh, yeah, no, I don't want to seem like I'm saying the public meetings will be the only time for stakeholder involvement. No, and if that's something, maybe we can discuss further if you want to, but we do plan on having meetings with stakeholders outside of the public hearing process. And if there is a group that, I mean, if the chamber wants to form a group, I think with the industrial district study, you guys did do that. We met with y'all, we met with the West Bank Development Task Force as well. We're very open to stakeholder involvement because while this is a great opportunity for us to identify the issues and the gaps, we obviously want to hear that feedback because, I mean, to Vincent's point, he's absolutely correct. These regulations will affect all major stakeholders, and the majority of undeveloped property is on the West Bank. Juliet was there.
I was just going to ask, would it be, and this may be a question more for Arista to chime in, but would it be an appropriate recommendation from this advisory committee that whether or not any of these members are interested in participating in perhaps a steering committee or an advisory committee to the UDC rewrite and kind of formalize that process? So beyond just individual meetings with stakeholders, that some of you act as formal advisors throughout the process of this. So that may be an appropriate recommendation to come from this committee.
I think maybe too with the opportunity, and I don't know if, I think it'd be duplicative to have a separate committee too, with the opportunity to maybe add some additional members than the ones who currently serve. I think that'd be good.
Oh, yeah, I think with the, if the recommendation is a steering committee, obviously that could be open to
Okay.
whomever.
Okay. And just for everybody's knowledge, what I think was helpful too is while we met with the planning and the permitting departments, we also met on our own to kind of make sure we were organized and unified.
Thank you, Ruth. So the first category with the speed bumps, I mean, we kind of touched on it with John's question with the CPZ and the MUC. These two, the CPZ is an overlay, which means it lays over the underlying zoning. MUC is the underlying zoning. It just allows for a multitude of permitted uses pulling from some of the other zoning districts. We're not proposing to change the permitted uses within the MUC at the moment. What we are only proposing to do is those development standards that are within there that can sometimes differ from the CPZ, we want to bring those into alignment. So you'll see here the requirements are similar but slightly different. Landscaping and buffering is different between the two districts. General design standards, fencing, signs, and then the thresholds for compliance. So as far as the thresholds for compliance go, new development always has to come in for review and to meet the standards. Existing development, there are some similarities between the two districts, but then there are some things that are different. Support buildings, so those accessory uses, those are different. Signs are treated differently. New signs are treated the same. Fencing is different, and then any amendments to an approved site plan, those are the same. So what are we hoping to do with these interim development standards? The purpose is to really clean up those inconsistencies, to bring them together into alignment so that we have really one set of development standards. They are also going to the draft interim standards that we have. We're also going to remove 3 site plan review triggers. So John, we're taking some stuff out. We're removing. We're removing. So the current regulations, what we found is that they capture projects which don't always really have things for a substantive review for planning to make. Things like that, the approval can either be through the permit and not through a separate site plan review application because, again, there's nothing really substantive for planning to review. So that is a definite speed bump that staff has identified coming to us with it that we are going to address with these interim standards. So for the draft interim standards, we have here what we are going to maintain and then what is going to be changed. So for landscaping and buffering, the CPZ requirements we're going to maintain those existing requirements, but for MUC, we are going to say that the CPZ applies. For the general design standards, we're going to maintain the existing in CPZ and then remove any additional design standards from the MUC. We are clarifying that fencing within both districts, the materials can only be wood, brick, or masonry. And then for signs, we are going to maintain the existing sign regulations within the CPZ, and then say those regulations apply to things that are different within the EVM regs. In the MUC, we are going to maintain those. So the draft interim development standards with the threshold for compliance. And I think this is going to be the big one here, or at least really this is a big one for the planning department to remove some of those speed bumps that we've identified. So for new development, you will always have to come in for site plan review. Now for existing development, if it is a change of permitted use with an increase in parking, that has been existing throughout, and we will maintain that. So if it is a change in use that requires an increase in parking, you will have to come in for site plan review and come into compliance. I will note with this, that the next topic of conversation is going to be our parking requirements. With the reduction in those parking requirements, we feel as though this change in use with permitted parking is not going to capture a lot of the sites that we would have captured before, because now that you have a reduced parking requirement, you're not going to be a change in use that requires additional parking. For additions, So with the CPZ additions, extensions, that was only triggered when you were at 50%. We are reducing it to 25%, bringing it in line with what is the MUC requirement now. So the MUC, the additions and extensions, was triggered at 25%. So we are reducing that, bringing it in line with the MUC requirement. For exterior and interior renovations, we're removing that as something that would trigger site plan review from both districts. For support buildings, we're maintaining the existing with the CPZ. For new detached signs, we are removing that as a trigger for site plan review requirement. That is something that we now are going to review within the permit as long as it doesn't create a variance. So prior to that, it was difficult to review within the permit because if there was an update, it wasn't always called on the site plan review, and then the planner may miss it with the permit. So what we're trying to do now is create an internal system where we capture that in the planning department to ensure that our records accurately reflect what the change was on the site without making the developer go through site plan review. Okay, oh, John?
Question about the parking?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it was a couple of years ago, you had, what would you call them, interim parking standards?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And they made sense, especially like with like big shopping centers where you had so much parking, but yet, sometimes, we would get like, oh, there's not enough parking, even though you look and there, I understand the smaller centers are more difficult, but I don't know, I like that interim, but then it went away, I believe, right? Now we're back to the.
Right. So as I had discussed before, we are only allowed to keep interim standards in place for a total of 18 months. So if we exceed past that 18 months, then the interim standards do lapse. And that's what happened with the interim parking standards.
But y'all are looking at
We
parking.
are looking to bring them back with this study call. And I believe you're referring to like the multi-use retail, multi-tenant retail,
Right.
where we have it at 1 to 400 if there are multiple uses within the shopping center.
Okay. All right, that's all. Just thought
have a
that was a
question.
nice thing.
Just for clarification on the additions, you have the reduction to 25%. Is that 25% of the building area, 25% of the value of the property? What's the,
Sure, it would be 25% of the building area, or if you're adding to the parking, 25% of your parking,
got it.
so not of the value. So that was the previous threshold, one of the ones that we removed. where
Was the
if you-
50% value, right?
The 50%, yes, because that is the main one that staff has found could be triggered with an interior renovation, and then there was nothing substantive for the planning department to review.
Right.
So we are taking that away so that we aren't having people come through for site plan review just because of that trigger, and there's really nothing substantive to be done on the site, no landscaping to add, nothing for the planning department to review.
Okay, thank
All
you.
right. And then, of course, any amendment to an approved site plan maintaining existing, you will have to come in for site plan review with that. So this is just looking at the draft standards. You had the language we emailed out to you. We do have copies up here if you want a hard copy. Just kind of goes through what we went through previously. All right. So this is definitely new. We found this worked with the industrial districts very well, where we put in the code the language of what clearly does not require site plan review. Like right now, we have what the triggers are for site plan review, but we don't say what doesn't require site plan review. So we like to be clear with that language and very clearly show this doesn't require site plan review. So interior renovations, any routine exterior maintenance, including excavation, filling, or grading, a change of use that does not increase the required parking, or sign permits for signs meeting all requirements of these standards. So those are things that will not require site plan review. All right, and I'll give it to Amanda for the parking requirements. Thank you.
I feel like you covered a lot of it already. All right, so for parking, the Jefferson Parish adopted the Jefferson Parish Green Infrastructure Plan in 2023. That plan had specific recommendations pointing to opportunities for the parish to peel back parking and impervious surfaces. So our parking regulations currently represent a key opportunity to decrease the amount of impermeable surface throughout the parish. And we have had 2 previous study calls that have tested out interim parking standards. And these have been proven favorable for developers, specifically with infill development. So our parking regulations for the interim development standards, we define gross floor area for calculating how much parking you need. So we remove specific areas from gross floor area, like storage areas or bathrooms or stairwells, so those don't count towards your total area. We are also allowing spaces at fuel pumps and EV charging stations to count towards your minimum parking requirements. And we are reformatting and updating the parking standard. So those will have, some of them will have reduced parking requirements. And then we are also streamlining off-site parking regulations and permitting that to occur in more zoning districts. So how does this help the process? The regulations are clearer than our parking regulations we have now. That allows for easier interpretation and application. The reduced parking ratios facilitate redevelopment and improvement of existing sites, so we can bring sites back into commerce quicker. And it can also help to reduce the need for variances and also the triggers for site plan review. So Beth also mentioned the landscape provisions. The landscape architect created a graphic to help show some of these things. But like Beth mentioned, certain landscaping requirements may cause confusion. We have limitations on paving within the required front yard. It's clearer in the CPZ and MUC, but not in our industrial regulations, so we want to be clear about that with the interim development standards. And then we have provisions for interior parking lot landscaping, and our graphic currently in our code does not provide any kind of guidance for that. So we are updating that graphic to provide clearer guidance. And then additionally, with the landscaping, we are removing the requirement for a permanent irrigation system for developments that are 6,000 square feet or less.
So switching from removing to adding flexibility, we understand that our current structure with our Euclidean zoning districts are rigid, especially when it comes to permitted uses. So we are introducing the new concept of conditional zoning and allowing accessory dwelling units through this conditional zoning process as well. So Arista actually helped us draft these regulations. So Arista, if you want to chime in if I miss anything. So just to give you all some background in terms of what conditional zoning is, it's a process of approving zoning map amendments with specific permissions or conditions. So through conditional zoning, we can allow additional uses on a subject property that are not currently permitted by the base zoning district, with the caveat that additional conditions or additional standards can be applied to the development. So in layman's terms, it's kind of like a use variance or a use exception. I know we've had a lot of inquiries regarding doing a certain, using a certain property for a certain use, but that particular zoning district doesn't allow it. So we have to defer or advise people to go through the zoning change process. So this process, I think, is more flexible, and then it actually doesn't introduce a whole suite of uses with that rezoning request. So it typically includes a site plan with tailored permissions and conditions. And so when we did the additional study, Arista looked at several different communities. And so these suite of recommendations that were brought before y'all are hybrid of what we saw in terms of best practices, but also address our specific procedures and unique issues related to Jefferson Parish. Conditional zoning is a fairly new flexible zoning tool that would benefit the parish by providing flexibility while ensuring development is compatible with neighboring uses, a degree of certainty in land use decisions not possible with the general use district, and an option for development when other flexible zoning tools would not apply or would not sufficiently or desirably address or accommodate the proposed development. So in terms of the process, conditional zoning would be a map amendment process where you would apply. It creates it has specific permissions and conditions that would be captured through a site plan and an ordinance. So it entails similar review process as the current map amendment process. However, there would be a specific site plan submitted with the application, and any sort of exceptions or enhancements will be captured in the ordinance. With the adoption of that ordinance, we would flag those properties in our GIS. So it'd be very clear through the MGO, application tool that, plan reviewers and the applicants are aware that there are special conditions that apply to that particular development. And then we've already had preliminary conversations with our GIS department to to add a layer in our GIS system so it's clear to the public and to, that there are additional conditions that apply to that particular site. So with this process, we can help address issues unique to the parish, our rigid zoning structure, existing housing stock, and development patterns, specifically commercial adjacent to residential, where we kind of foresee this happening. We actually have another zoning case on the East Bank that's a similar request, where you have commercial along the major corridor, and then the excess parking is actually zoned residential. So we've seen numerous requests. I think the Taco Bell property on Veterans, we have an Ochsner application in right now where basically it's a commercial site that they're trying to rezone additional property to commercial just for excess parking. So this tool could be used to address that and address concerns that the neighbors may have by introducing additional commercial zoning in that particular neighborhood.
Elaine,
Yes.
for those conditional zoning, would that go through KAB?
Yes.
And council?
Yes. So there is the same legislative process as map amendments. We are adding additional requirements in terms of a pre-application conference and a neighborhood participation meeting.
So there is going to be, okay,
Yes.
pre-application conference.
Yes, so there's a pre-application conference as well as a neighborhood participation meeting that would be required just for this type of development.
Just for those, okay.
Yes.
Great.
Can you explain the neighborhood participation meeting?
So that is, I'm going to jump to that really quick. So basically, in terms of the general process, you would have to come into the planning department to review the proposal. You would be required to have a neighborhood participation meeting between 15, I think, to 30 days ahead of the public hearing. And then there's a whole suite of requirements in terms of you would have to send notification to residents within 300 feet. You'd also have to notify the council office of that specific, the respective district. And then there's a list of items that you would also need to retain and submit with your application that's covered in the proposed regulations.
So what triggers the need, can you explain what triggers the need for the neighborhood meeting?
Going through this process.
Okay.
So this is basically a new tool that it allows a developer to propose something that's not currently allowed in the code. So I think the purpose of the neighborhood meeting for this particular type of development is because it's not clearly written in the regulations. People can propose something that's not clearly defined in our regulations. So to make the neighborhood participation meeting is a tool that developers can use to provide information about their project ahead of the public hearing process.
But there's some guidelines, there's some
Yes.
rails that you can't just
No.
propose any use, right? There's gonna
No,
be-
yes, so this is kind of jumping ahead to the process. We have limitations on uses that you can and can't do in residential and non-residential zoning districts.
And is there like a size or monetary amount that triggers this, or it's any conditional zoning would have to go through this
Any
process?
conditional zoning map amendment would go, sorry. Any conditional zoning would go through this process.
Could you explain a little more how this would apply to existing accessory dwelling units?
Yes, let's kind of jumping back to just kind of the limitations. So for residential districts, there's a very limited list of alternative uses, some with additional development standards. For commercial and industrial mixed-use districts, there are specific uses that are prohibited from this application. So when we were drafting this, we understood that especially in the residential, there is concerns about the types of uses that would be allowed. So we limited it to, uses that, either are allowed in like the C1 or, commercial adjacent to residential zoning districts. This is where we're kind of allowing that accessory dwelling unit and introducing a process for approval for that particular type of development through this planning land use application. And then we put it even additional standards for certain uses in terms of size and landscaping requirements.
So am I correct, this is a path for bringing into zoning compliance those that are not in zoning compliance at this time?
Yes.
Is this
For
all-
certain types of uses. So like, for example, we had a case on, not this last council meeting, but the council meeting before, a gentleman had basically renovated his single into a double illegally in an R1A zoning district. He actually had a significant size lot. He made some enhancements to his property that people actually came out in support of his proposed development. And there were other doubles within the vicinity. So we recommended denial because it introduced a spot zone of R2 in that particular neighborhood, but that particular project would have been prime for this type of application.
Okay, so I'm following that. This is not addressing the question that we talked about a little bit about adding in the possibility of accessory dwelling units in the future.
So what this does, so you can actually apply for the accessory dwelling unit, but it would have to go through this process. So you could apply, instead of going for that R2 zoning for a double, you would go and apply for the ADU, provided additional standards are met through this conditional zoning map amendment process.
And then just to be clear, right now, if you apply for a conditional zoning, you do not have to do the neighborhood participation.
We don't have it.
We
You
don't
can't do it at all. Okay.
So this is a
Thank you.
brand-new land use application, and so that's why there is a significant amount of provisions related in the document that was provided to y'all, because we have to basically set up a whole set of procedures for this new application. So this is something we don't have now. It is something that we, like, several other communities have, including like Lafayette, Charlotte. We also looked at, I think, the rest looked at Columbus, and so we use those other communities to kind of frame our system.
So I guess to be clear, this doesn't come into play if you have residential and then you have commercial in the front, and depending upon what it's zoned, you don't have to get the neighborhood involved and everybody else involved, as long as the use in the commercial that is adjacent to the residential fits in the zoning requirement.
Yes.
Okay.
Unless like you were trying to expand further into the residential, then you'd have to use this without, use this map amendment tool to do that.
And how is this different than applying for a variance? Because I always thought when something didn't comply with the zoning, you could apply for a variance.
So right now, we don't have a use variance process. You can apply for variances to certain requirements, but you can't apply to to get an acceptance for a certain use. So this basically is functioning, this process provides a path forward to function that way. So these are just some examples of how conditional zoning can be applied in a residential zoning district. You could put possible jewelry store in an R1A zoning district. Like I mentioned, you could have an overflow parking lot associated with a business. You could also, do a two-family and a single-family zoning district or an accessory dwelling unit.
I'm sorry, and when does this go into place?
So this is part of what's being proposed with the interim standards. So this whole process and all of these regulations are in kind of draft form, but we're trying to introduce it with these interim standards for the code rewrite. And we're really trying to...
Not for like another year?
Well, December.
Oh, December.
We're aiming for December. But
That is my question too. I think, I'm going to guess at this, but I think I'm right. If the council acts on your proposal in October, these are done, the council's action is done by resolution or something like that. It's effective immediately, is that correct?
correct.
And it will last for a year, could be extended for 6 more months if the council wishes.
Correct.
I guess if y'all are triggering this date, hoping to be concluded with all your studies by then.
Yes.
Okay, explain to me what ADU means, conditional zoning, where would that apply? And give me a little bit more.
So if you were in a residential zoning district, you could apply to put an accessory dwelling unit on your property in the zoning districts provided below. So it's like any of the, the R1s, S1, OBM1. So these are all the zoning districts where you could apply for conditional zoning for an accessory dwelling unit.
So I'm going to interject at this point, if that's all right, Elena. 2 things I want to come back to. To Bruce's question, this is right now for discussion with you all, for you all to provide feedback and information to the planning department on these conceptual ideas. The planning department is not planning, as Ms. Martin said, to introduce these interim zoning standards, which include this brand new concept of conditional zoning, until December. So in October is the agreement for the consultant to start the UDC rewrite. We're going to bump these back a little bit as far as introduction. They're looking at December, and that's part of the reason for this discussion this morning, is for you all to have the opportunity to provide feedback before they get introduced and implemented. You're correct, Bruce, that in December, if approved by the council by resolution, then they go into immediate effect. As far as the ADUs, I believe Ms. Gesser has
Yeah, so we-
a whole presentation
Yeah, so we have-
regarding ADUs, independent of the conversation regarding conditional zoning. And so in the interest of time, let's get through this part of conditional zoning and see how much of ADUs we can get through. We do have a couple of other items on the agenda, and I think we are already coming up on the 10 o'clock hour. And so in the interest of getting all of us out of here by 11, I do think we kind of get through this conditional zoning, and then we may need to return to this overall concept at the next meeting, which is part of the reason why the planning department is waiting until December to introduce, so that this committee has time to discuss this potentially over a couple of meetings, because it is a lot of information to try to digest and understand how it works.
I just want to make this request once again. The Home Builders Association has a real expert, true expert, nationwide expert on housing and ADUs, and he's waiting for the contact about all of this from Ms. Martin. And I'm going to tell him this is coming up, so it sounds like we're ready for the input on that between October and December.
I have had a chance to touch base with Frank, but I didn't get his contact information. Frank
I'll send
does, so
it to you.
thank you, Bruce. We are set to come to the home builders October 21st.
Right, okay.
Yeah, to come speak to you guys about these interim
You'll get
regulations.
ready for that, thank you.
Yeah.
So in terms of how conditional zoning works in the non-residential districts, we basically just put limitations on certain uses that we don't want in certain zoning districts. So it is more broad in terms of the types of uses that you could, apply conditional zoning to. So for example, you could have a dance studio in GO1. Currently, our, Chapter 40 zoning districts have very specific lists of uses, and so you may have a use that's synonymous or in terms of intensity the same, but it's just not allowed because it's not on that list. So this is kind of, like I said, an opportunity to allow certain uses that are appropriate in certain zoning districts. We did put some restrictions on where you could apply this to. So they're not allowed in the industrial districts except for the IMU. They're not allowed to modify any overlay district requirements. They cannot modify any standards specifically restricted from waivers or variances. Further, they cannot be used as an alternative to a variance. Where a variance has previously been denied, they cannot be resubmitted as a conditional zoning map amendment. However, we are allowing for a variance approval to be kind of done concurrently with the conditional zoning map amendment. So even if your project does have variances, you could still kind of, include those in your request. It would just have to be kind of in conjunction with. So like I said, we kind of went through and laid out the different procedures in the draft code that y'all were provided. We are requiring a pre-application conference for these types of requests. There is that neighborhood meeting component for all conditional zoning requests. And we also, and it'll go through the traditional legislative process that, for our other land use cases. So it's going to go before the Planning Advisory Board, and the council will, have the ultimate decision-making authority on these types of applications.
I'm sorry, I know, I keep interrupting. Is there any other neighborhood meeting where neighborhood meetings come into play besides the conditional?
No, this is the only, I know we had a lot of discussion at one of those earlier meetings about the neighborhood participation meetings. We feel that this type of development is actually where it's probably the most appropriate. So we're not doing widespread neighborhood meetings. This is kind of a test tool to kind of introduce it for these unique projects, given that they can vary so drastically from project to project. And I think it's also a tool to kind of help developers design ahead of the public hearing process, and hopefully save time at the back end when you're making last minute changes anyways to address neighborhood concerns or requests from the council.
I have a question. Do you feel that neighborhood meetings are appropriate when it's dealing with a property that's in an IMU zoning? Because a lot of the IMU zonings don't really have neighborhoods next to them.
Well, I mean, I think, yes. It may not be neighborhoods from the sense of like residents, but there's also other property owners that may be impacted by those proposed developments. So I think we've kept it the same language as we have for our other land use cases. So it's that 300-foot and abutting property owners list. It's like it would be the same people that would be getting noticed for the public hearing. So if they just want to learn about the project, so they may not be impacted from like as a resident, but as a property owner, they may be impacted or have questions about the proposed development. And like I said, it's the same group of people that's going to get a letter for your land use case. So it's not, those are the people that are going to get notified anyways. And so we did put some, kind of strict regulations in terms of effect for approval. So the approved amendments and site plans become binding regulations, and non-compliance can lead to revocation. We did factor in a minor amendment process, so if you're making minor changes to the proposed site plan, that you don't have to go through the whole conditional zoning map amendment process twice. But that list is pretty synonymous with our industrial zoning for the minor amendments for the SBUs that we just approved with the industrial zoning district study. Conditional approvals expire after 2 years if substantial progress is not made. However, extensions may be granted, and then approvals can be revoked for noncompliance. So, Bruce stepped out, but this is good. Oh, he's back here. Okay. So, like mentioned, we did meet with the home builders. We did a couple months ago. And we're going to continue to meet with them about this particular topic. But through this conditional zoning, we are trying to allow for accessory dwelling units or a path forward for them in the parish. Currently, we have what is called a secondary culinary facility, and they are special permitted uses in the R1A, R1B, R1C, R1D, and OBM1 districts. They also require council approval and a renewal. They require the occupant of the accessory secondary culinary facility to be related by blood or marriage. And then they have some other onerous requirements that are tied to them as well. They have to be located within the principal structure. They can be no greater than 25% of the structure, and they have to be accessible only through the principal structure. They may not protrude into any required yards. Needless to say, these are very onerous and not really helpful for most of the people that want to do this type of development. So just for some background, accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, act as small homes or dwellings that exist on the same lot as a single-family residence. The traditional home type is reemerging as an affordable and flexible housing option that meets the needs of older adults and young families alike. So you might have heard of things like granny flats or mother-in-law suites. I think a lot of empty nesters are not becoming so empty these days, with college kids moving back home after they go to school. So I know similar communities like Gretna permit ADUs to a certain extent in many or most of their residential zoning districts with additional standards and requirements. So we looked at other communities, and this is something that other states have even kind of promoted and supported to address like housing issues in their respective communities. So they provide another housing option. They offer a way to include smaller, relatively affordable homes in established neighborhoods without a significant impact on that area. They provide a more dispersed and incremental way of adding homes to a community than other options, such as a multi-story apartment complex. And they're typically managed by the homeowners who live on the premises. Such landlords are less likely to tolerate a destructive tenant and can house people of all ages. I will say, because they're not tying it to being a relative, it is something you can rent to long-term tenants. We put restrictions specifically that restrict the use of these ADUs for short-term rental. So these draft ADU regulations provide more flexibility than the current regulations for the secondary culinary facilities. So basically, you can allow an ADU as an accessory use to a single-family detached dwelling unit subject to the conditional zoning amendment process. Allows ADUs to be detached from the primary residence. It allows the ADUs to be located in the required yards with the same setback requirements as accessory structures. It's permitted in more districts than the secondary culinary facilities are, and it does not require occupants to be related by blood or marriage to the occupant of the principal structure. They still limit, we still have limits on the number, so you can only have one ADU per lot, and then we have provided like a maximum size as well. So this, this slide, promise, I'm getting close. I know it's a lot. No. So basically, the slide just kind of goes through the specific requirements, Bruce. And like I said, they are similar to accessory structures, but they are slightly different. So in terms of the size, they're limited to the 50% of the principal building, not to exceed 1,000 feet. So you can't do a massive, massive ADU that's bigger than the principal structure. We're putting like the same limitations in terms of the height as accessory structures in the rear yards. We're limiting them to 13 feet. We have some general design standards that we are requiring, and then we are also requiring a minimum parking space of 1 space for the additional unit. All right. So just really briefly, staff identified some other issues or topics that have come up recently that we also wanted to address with the interim standards. And this kind of spreadsheet this table kind of identifies like the minor changes that we are doing. So in terms of the home occupations and home offices, these issues have kind of come up through our zoning clearance process. So we're adding instructional training and professional services as permitted home occupations. Currently, our list of home occupations is very specific, and so if you're not on that list, you cannot be considered a home occupation. So this provides a little more flexibility for a zoning administrator for allowing a variety of home occupations. We also have a home office application, so we're providing a use that's associated with that as well. Outdoor storage has become a hot topic in our office, and we've gotten numerous calls every week, and so we have provided some development regulations to outdoor storage in the proposed regulations before y'all. And then we've also addressed public parks and playgrounds and introduced specialty restaurant as a new use kind of in conjunction with that conditional zoning. So how does this help the process? These clear definitions and standards provide for easier interpretation and application. So wrapping up our presentation, if y'all have specific edits to the draft, you could send it to Amanda or myself. Our email address is on the screen. And we're happy to, meet with, one-on-one with y'all if you have specific or, lengthy comments or questions regarding the proposed regulations. We really do encourage the redlining. I know when we did the industrial zoning district study, several of the participants or stakeholders did provide us like specific red line edits, and those are very helpful to kind of go through, as staff and then with those respective stakeholders. So please send us your comments. And then, like I said, we're kind of aiming to kind of provide an update or any revisions at the next PPAC meeting. We're trying to get these standards adopted in December. So I know we went through a lot of information, but we really appreciate your feedback, and any and all feedback is much appreciated. All right, Bruce.
Forgive my English, how fast can you provide us with this PowerPoint presentation?
I mean, I think that's a Juliet question, but I think it shouldn't be too long. We're probably like 5 more. Yes, and we did present y'all with the actual interim standards ahead of this meeting, so.
Yes, so on your tables, you have a summary document, which was previously emailed to you, that summarizes a lot of what was on the actual PowerPoint presentations. And then every committee member was emailed, it's a 30-page document, which is the specific standards that become the regulations. So Frank received a copy of it, but I can also forward a copy of that to you, Bruce.
Yeah, you didn't send it to me, please do that. I'm looking for this simple presentation.
But yes, we can, I will, when I get back to the office this afternoon, we can make a PDF of this to send out to the committee members.
Next couple of days.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we have marked it draft for discussion by the committee simply because things may change depending upon your feedback. But certainly, I believe as they mentioned, they're going to be meeting with the Home Builders Association specifically about the ADUs. So if you all have your organizations or your groups that you want to take these concepts back and say, hey, this is what Jefferson Parish is considering, can we get together and meet with some staff so that we're clear on how we feel about this? I think that would be appropriate. We just wanted to make clear, this is not what's happening tomorrow. This is for discussion purposes. This is today's draft for this committee meeting. And so that's why it's marked, please don't distribute. But we do recognize that you may have others that you want to discuss these topics with. We're just trying to make clear that these may be subject to additional changes.
When was the 30-page document emailed out?
Last week.
Last week?
With
So
the
it would have been in the email?
Yes,
for
the email
notice of the
reminder
meeting?
from,
Okay.
from Michelle Forsyth that had the attachment with the draft minutes, the agenda, and then this document, as well as the specific regulations, was attached to that reminder email from Michelle.
Julia, what happens if a business is sold that has a conventional zone attached to it?
As the regulations stand currently, if the business is sold, we would like the new property owner to come in. If they are keeping the same business, we're working through like an affidavit process where they would just update the contact information. But if there's any change in the business, it would have to come back through the conditional zoning map amendment.
So with changes, I'm just thinking as a real estate agent, it may affect financing for somebody who wants to buy
Sure.
an existing business building if it's conditional upon going back before the council. Like, what kind of changes, are you talking about major changes or just?
Any change in use, because the conditional zoning is tied to the use of the property. Because as we discussed, it is essentially a use variance to allow a use that would not otherwise be permitted within that district.
So say if daycare was permitted and they sell it and it's going to stay a daycare, does that have to go before anything?
So that we're working in the same way that we kind of do with our industrial districts or uses now. We have like an affidavit noting the change in ownership so that we can update our records and contact information. But if the use isn't changing, we don't want to send that owner, that new owner, back through the conditional zoning map amendment process. But we do want to make sure that any potential purchasers are aware of what is tied to that property, the restrictions as far as the site plan is concerned, and the restrictions to use.
Beth, how do you police that as far as like another use comes in? Say a dress shop gets sold and they're going to turn it into a coffee shop. Coffee shops are light uses. You don't need grease traps. You don't need hoods. You don't need. How does that? How do they police that to know that use is staying the same?
So one of the ways we would do that is if they came in to get their zoning clearance, right, that would automatically trigger, because the zoning administrator, when he puts that address in NPN, he would be able to see that previous approval that it's tied to that use, and then if it's a change in use, then at that point, he won't issue the zoning clearance. He'll let the business owner know you need a tenant build out, you're gonna have to go through this process. If they don't
If they don't come in for a zoning clearance, what happens?
if they don't follow the building code and get a building permit for the change in use, the only way that we're gonna know is if the neighbors let us know, which goes back to that neighborhood participation meeting, right? Since this is something so new, and neighborhood doesn't mean residential, to Will's point, you know, it can be just property owners, but since this is such a new tool that we are very excited about, but can be used in a legal way, we want to make certain that we do our best to police it, yes, and document it, so that it doesn't negatively affect the other property owners in the area.
I had a question. So like to Stacy's point on just like representing people who would go to buy a business, I'm just thinking about someone who might buy, you know, a piece of property with a conditional zoning attached to it. The only way that, if they weren't told about the conditional zoning, then the only way that they would know would be looking through the public records, right? And so if you're a smart purchaser, you know, you're going to look through the public records to see that there's something there, what's in the title. So my question is there anything that will be written on this conditional zoning that specifically states that a change in use will trigger, you know, will essentially acts the conditional zoning that's there?
I mean, in
So
the
that they
ordinance,
understand.
that's definitely something we could add. I think to your point, the question is whether or not we're gonna require recordation of it. And
Yeah, that's another.
I know, I go back and forth with that, because that can sometimes, depending on how often it changes, we've seen it with the site plan review become an onerous obligation. But to yours and to Stacy's point, if it's not in the public record, then the chances are, heightened that someone may not find out about it. So I think that's something to consider.
Yeah, I mean, if they close on a business, they have a transaction, they go in for, a zoning clearance, and then they're like, uh-oh, we've got a problem, and I'd rather not see someone kind of stumble at that
Right,
point.
no, it's a very
So-
good point. We don't want them to stumble at that point either. We want everyone to be aware of it ahead of going through any purchase transaction. So I will take that.
Will, how would that different than, if you're gonna change the use of the business, how would that different from going to look, whatever the current zoning is, to see if you could do that new business?
We're only talking about like an accessory, lot, potentially. Like if, you use like, the example of a daycare. And so you've got a daycare that's permitted on one lot, and then you've got a conditional zoning for parking or something else on the, the adjacent lot. Then, there could be a situation where, maybe the daycare changes. And
Okay, I see what you're saying.
but, I don't know if the daycare planned on using some of the lot adjacent to it for, a playground or whatever, then there could be a situation where there's a gray area there, is all I'm saying, without the person understanding that that conditional zoning is in effect.
I will say, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I will say, John, I know that you spend a lot of time in the zoning ordinance, but not all real estate agent or potential property owners do, unfortunately. So if we put it, I feel like maybe if it's recorded in the clerk report records, there's a greater chance that they are put on notice through whatever title search their attorney may do, as opposed to looking through the zoning ordinance. And I think that may be just practice that we can take to add to it, to ensure that we're being as open and transparent as possible with that potential purchaser.
I think that's super important because not everybody that buys a commercial property is a sophisticated corporation. Sometimes you have individuals buying a daycare center. They work at a daycare center and they want to buy one that's for sale. And their real estate agent may be their cousin who just got their real estate license and doesn't know the check zoning. They don't know the check zoning, and I can see, the real potential for some real problems in a lot of those scenarios, just, single lots and not these big companies.
Sure.
I mean, it could be devastating for
Absolutely.
somebody, but single, mom who wants to open a daycare center and then she buys it and then, she can't use it.
Correct.
Really,
And she's sunk all her money into that.
because I can see that happening a lot.
So in a situation, in a situation where you have a conditional zoning classification on a piece of property, am I to understand that that conditional zoning is not filed in the public record attributable to that piece of property?
So we don't have it in the standards currently, but after this conversation, I think we'll be adding.
Okay, because, I mean, if somebody bought something, they're going to rely on their attorney is going to get a title policy and all that kind of good stuff, and if there's nothing there, okay.
Any other follow-up questions? I can't answer. Excuse me. I am losing my voice a bit, so I apologize. We're going to talk a little bit about the expediting permitting review process, but more importantly, Houston specific. And if I may, I'm going to ask you if you really want to take a look at theirs in depth, because I'm just going to do a brush over for you. You can Google it on Houston Permit Center dashboard, and it will bring you up to the site, and the site will tell you.
I'm sorry, what was the,
Just Google Houston Permit Center.
oh, Houston.
Is it on? There we go. Houston Permit Center dashboard. And what you'll look for specifically is the guide and form, and it'll kind of give you the process. I'm going to go over some of that right now, okay? One of the things that I think everyone knows, but I'll mention it just the same, Houston has not adopted a zoning ordinance. So that's noteworthy as I go through this. However, the planning is intimately involved in that process. So when we talk about expediting a building plan right now, building plans, it's without the benefit of having planning involved. This is just about building process and the expediting those plans. The Houston permitting staff, and I'm giving you some statistics because it's noteworthy to see what the differences are. I want to mention up front that it does work there. The expediting process does work. Houston right now has a much larger staff of just less than 500 versus our 76.
I'm sorry, one more question.
Yes.
This is to pay for the you have to
Yes,
pay for
it's a
this?
paid expediting
Okay.
service. In speaking with the staff yesterday, in the conversation, they do have one item that's not in here that I wanted to bring up. So when you look it up on the guide, it's not going to show, I don't believe. It says the design professionals need to be available during the after-hours review time to make the necessary change, and you can do that by call, Zoom, or Teams. So you really do have to have a commitment to this. Your design professional will have to be involved. Otherwise, you're just paying money for someone to review it, and they'll pass it forward through their network. Bless you. Definition that you're going to see in the guide is they use the MEPs, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, but then you're going to hear them say structural. Structural means building. They're talking about a building plans, a review, a building inspector. They call it structural. And I'm actually going over some things that they've mentioned to me that come up to them quite a bit, and we'll get into the points on the guide in a minute. They have a service level agreement. It's turnaround. It means turnaround time for submittals. It does not mean turnaround time for permit. So what I'm about to tell you is that the service level agreement for residential is 10 days. For their one stop, it's 5 days. That doesn't mean you're going to get a permit that. And what it means is you've submitted something, they've reviewed it, they're sending it back to you to fix the discrepancies. The reason why I think it'll work here, this type of expedite plans, is they're today in their on their website, you'll see that they have 1,961 plans in queue, with their oldest commercial plan 27 days and the oldest residential 13 days. So they are actually getting these out quickly. The 27 days, excuse me, happens to be the fire marshal that's holding the plans up. And I want to reiterate, keep in mind that this is primarily what I'm talking about right now is for the building plans and building plan zone. Okay? And forgive me if it's called the after hours program. I may refer to it as the CPO or citizen paid overtime. Is what I'm accustomed to calling it. So, some of the things that I think are worthy of mentioning, and we can move to the, no, that was fine. For qualifications, at least one complete full cycle has to be performed in the plans process out of the system as rejected with rejected comments. Plans need to be in the system. You can't just bring them to the office and we're going to look at them. They're going to look at them, excuse me. It has to be in the system. This is a nuance that they have that is for timing wise, and I'll explain that in a minute. Plans submitted before 10 a.m., they have to be submitted before 10 a.m., and if they come in after that, they'll be reviewed the next day. What it doesn't say is that you have to have them at 6 a.m., but if you come in at 5:59 a.m., they won't accept it. You have to be at 6 because there's a mad rush to get them in because there's only so many that they can do in a given period of time. They emphasize to me, which I know and I think I've mentioned to you at one point, is it's the customer's responsibility to make sure the drawings documents, requirements are adequately supplied to them for this review. If you haven't provided those, what transpires is that they won't do the review and you lost your fee. So it's imperative that you have that done. Reviews will be based upon the availability of the plan outs. Now, that's why I brought in the first part of this, they have quite a few plans that they're nearing about 125, I believe. We don't have that many. So it will be based on the expediting process, will be based on the amount of available plan reviewers that actually want to do overtime. And again, services are offered only for structural, mechanical, plumbing, electrical, fire sprinklers. For that, we will do the fire sprinklers. Did you want to bring in the planning portion of that? I'm sorry. That's all right.
So the slide on the screen is just,
Yeah.
stay there for a second. So this is just to give you an idea of what Houston charges for their review. Similarly, Bruce, as part of this presentation, the previous two screens back is a copy of the, if you will actually double click on that document, let's see if we can open that. That is actually a copy of the guidelines for the expedited plan review that the city of Houston offers. I don't know if you'll open it as a document. Yeah, actually, if you just escape, I actually have it pulled up already. Oh, nope, it's kind of closed. All right, double click on it now.
There you go.
All right, not having. Okay, but we can attach these guides when we send out the PDF of this presentation. So the guides summarize all of the information that Mark just went through. Just relaunch the presentation.
While we're going through that, it's my understanding, and perhaps I'm in error, but we have a shortage of people in the permitting planning department right now.
We have some
limited staff.
We do have some vacancies.
Okay, so with a limited staff, I'm trying to understand how you're going to be able to do the expedited permitting.
Great question. It's after hours.
No.
So, I'm sorry.
So you have people that'll work after hours to get things done.
Correct.
At the expense of the customer.
Yes.
And you don't have enough people to do all the work, or maybe, I don't know. It just.
Well, Vincent, that's why I brought up the statistics of how large Houston is, and they still have to do it. They have to do it after hours. It's impossible to maintain. I mean, the staff will keep getting greater and greater and greater. So what they're offering is a alternative. If you're willing to pay the price, you can get it done in a quicker time, but it'll be after hours.
At an additional expense.
With a fee, yes.
Do not some of them work after hours already?
Some of them have doubled their income with all the after hours they do. In Houston, sorry.
Is there any consideration being given to the thought that this could be by third party review? I think zoning is a challenge, I realize, under the building code, which I think is where we're talking. That's less of a challenge. The third party, that's where it is available.
To do review?
Yeah.
Because it's intertwined here with zoning and planning, that would be very difficult, I would think. Not impossible, but very, very difficult.
We earlier in the meeting discussed third parties being engaged by Jefferson Parish. A contract was being written. I haven't heard much more about that.
So that third party is strictly for inspections. That third party contract does not include plans review. So that is strictly an as-needed inspections provision. Mark has been making significant headway in fulfilling our inspector positions and also working to formulate multidiscipline inspectors so that we can send out a single inspector to do both the gas and plumbing inspection at the same time. And eventually, our long-term hope is to be able to see, particularly for residential, a single inspector who has all trades, but that's a training position we have to get to as well as a staffing. We wanted to, so I do want to at this point address the fact that Mr. Chimner is the committee member who initially had brought forth that he had experience with expedited permitting in other jurisdictions. So we knew of Houston because of Mark's experience there. So he is only speaking today of his experience with Houston, and he has reached out to some contacts for some changes that they've made since his time with that department. Mr. Chimner, unfortunately, is not able to be here today, but he did let us know that he wanted us to go ahead and start the discussion, have Mark present to you regarding Houston's processes and procedures. He will watch the video of this meeting when we post it to the website, and then he'll be prepared to expand a little bit more on his experience in other jurisdictions with expedited permitting. But we did want to still go ahead and introduce this so that you could understand how it at least works in one other jurisdiction, but this will be a conversation that we can continue. So the slides we presented are, again, just excerpts from those guidelines. If you go to the next slide, please. As a reminder, we just wanted to kind of give you an idea of the pricing too of something like this. So it is a minimum 4 hours that you're paying for per trade. So if you are asking for your plumbing plans, your mechanical plans, and your electrical plans all being looked at, then you are paying that $317 fee for each of those plans to be reviewed. And then there's, an additional cost there. So I think the big thing that we wanted to emphasize as we talk about expedited plans review is this is strictly limited to your building code compliance plans, your mechanical code compliance plans. This does not address if you need a variance to some zoning standard. You can pay this fee, but you're still going through that public hearing process, and your permit will still not get issued until you clear those other hurdles. I do have a couple of slides because, to our point, the Houston Planning Department does also have their own expedited review, as well as I understand their Public Works also offers an expedited review, which is, our equivalent is what you go through with working with our engineering department. So, to Mark's point he addressed earlier, there's often a misconception that because Houston doesn't have zoning, that they don't have development regulations. There are still development regulations that projects in Houston do have to go through their planning department, which addresses lot size requirements, building setbacks, parking and landscaping. And this is just sort of a list of their general chapters which cover those additional regulations that projects do have to go through. And then we have another slide, which is the guideline form for the Houston Planning Expedited Review. So just to say that it's not just one piece that can be addressed through expedited review, but it is something that for strictly residential or projects that are in strictly commercial zoning districts that have no other planning implications, you don't need a zoning change, you don't need a subdivision. This is something that we can look at. This is just our first stop at looking at it. This is how it's done in Houston. And I think that Mr. Chimner will have more to contribute to this conversation at our next meeting about other jurisdictions.
I want to say thank you, first of all, for the creativity and inspiration that you were bringing to this question, how to speed things up. I like the fact that you're considering flexibility. I am concerned that you are with how to apply this in Jefferson Parish. Even a residential permit reconstruction has to go through other departments. And that does slow it down, sometimes complicate.
So I think that where this can be useful, so if we go back to the first slide on the guidelines, is The first thing it says is, this is not an expedited first review. You have to have made that initial application.
Correct.
I think the way to think about the best use of this and the best way that this may be beneficial in Jefferson Parish is you've got one comment left, you need to make one change on your electrical, and you want to make sure it gets done that day so that tomorrow your permit can get issued, and that you're not waiting maybe 3 days for the electrical guy to get back to you. So I want to pull some information. I want to go back to, and Latrice has been really helpful for this, on our current indicators on how quickly our building permits and our mechanical guys and electrical guys are getting those plans reviews done. Because truthfully, when we looked at the information, a lot of times your initial construction drawing plans reviews are being done within a 10-day, within a 5-day period. It is those additional standards, your water meter connection, the subdivision that you have to do, that draws out the issuance of your permit. This may be trying to solve a problem that for straight building permit review, we don't necessarily have. Now, it may be of value to you all as landowners and builders. I don't mind paying $400 if I can get my plans out the door 3 days faster. That's a value we need to hear from you all, whether or not that's a value to you. In us having to implement and establish a process and figure out the staffing and all of that, if that is something you say, you know what, absolutely, if I can save 2 days off of getting my building permit issued, I'll gladly pay an additional $500 fee. Jefferson Parish, just figure out how to make it work. Figure out how to make it work. That's the feedback we need from you all, is if it's a value add.
It definitely, it has value for some of our members who are not here today. I've heard Chance Miller talk about it a lot. In very high and in more complicated areas in Mary and so forth. It's not strictly building code. But I would love to see when we can take it from Houston on the letterhead to Jefferson Parish, rewriting it so it is Jefferson Parish guidelines for after-hours permit review.
Sure.
I don't know how fast you can do that. That's absolutely creative. I love it.
Well, you can also use it on a master project. So if you have 3 or 4 prototypes that you're using, that you've made, they're already approved, this can work for you in that instance as well.
One of our builder members, at least one, probably 3, really glad to hear that. And I think they're already doing that. I'm not in their shoes, so I'm not certain.
But we are trying to be creative with the amount of staffing we have and working after hours. That also gives the people that are, the planners who are going to work after hours an opportunity for additional income. But it also gives you the ability to move forward quicker, and that's what you've asked for, to move quickly.
In New Orleans, by the way, just for this group, has found another way to increase income for client reviewers and inspectors. We heard about it at the last meeting, up to 50%. They've actually found a way, and they are working in that field of increasing income for the code officials, so that the job is done more efficient. This is another way to work.
Right, and we're gonna sit with Tammy here in the very near future from New Orleans to actually go over some of those things that she's working on. She's really interested to see what we're doing here in the advisory board.
Absolutely.
Are we talking about a 24-hour turnaround with the expedited process, or are we talking about, instead of 3 days, it'll be 1 day? I mean, what are we talking about?
If you follow all the conditions, if you have no more than 20 write-ups on your plans and all the conditions that fit here, and when you apply for it, for the after hours, that your design professional is available by phone call, by Teams or Zoom, you could have it done that evening. They'll process it out that night. Now, I'm talking about Houston, not here yet, but talking about Houston. Yes, they could process it out that evening.
So it would be less than 24 hours
Yes.
from the time it's submitted, assuming everything that is submitted properly, where that plan reviewer says, I've reviewed your plumbing stuff or your electrical stuff that was buried someplace else, and you're good to go.
Yes, Vincent, but I want to be clear, it's not here yet.
Right, no, I understand.
And I will also say, again, I think we would benefit from hearing from Mr. Chimner of other communities.
Sure.
Houston is just one example. We brought it forward because FARC already has experience with Houston. I think it would behoove this committee to, find out where other jurisdictions have been successful. And for that, Mr. Chimner is the one who's suggested that he had experience with it. So also, but if any of you have experience in other jurisdictions where they implement a similar process, please let us know. Try to see if we can't talk to somebody in that jurisdiction, make sure we're clear on how it works. From the beginning, I wanted to make sure we find a process that is actually functional and is actually successful. It does us no good to emulate a process that is problematic for that jurisdiction. We want to follow success stories.
I have a couple minutes. Any other questions?
When we get into serious conversations with national out-of-state retailers, one of the things that always comes up is how long does it take to get it permitted, right? So if you can get this kind of turnaround, it's a big competitive advantage. I'm not going to tell you that we've lost deals because of that, but I think in terms of being a business-friendly community, being able to say we have this kind of process, I think from a business perspective, it's a big deal.
Agreed. I mean, it has helped the city of Houston. I know that for a fact. I think Julie had brought up the fact that they have an expedited program for planning as well. That may be something that we entertain through the planning department. That would help move that process forward for you and make us more competitive. By the way, we mentioned about the multi-level inspections. That is so that we can get to be competitive with the third-party inspectors and so that we can get quicker turnarounds.
By the way, the fees aren't scary in the scheme of things, the kind of numbers you're talking about here. That's, I would say we just want to throw money away, right? But in terms of getting things done, these are not scary fees. That would not.
Well, to quote the chamber, the fees, I think it was 12%, only 12% of you that they pulled had concern about fees. So I think you're correct.
I think the only concern I would bring up is, and that this is mostly is for plan review. One thing that you could have, so you have a one-day turnaround plan review and then still stop in public works or in another department. So I do think that you probably need to either work with those departments that have expedited or kind of let everybody know, because I can see a situation where a client pays for that and then it's stuck in another department. And now that, it's already an issue when it's down to that one person left on the department.
That's exactly our
And
concern.
now it's going to really be an issue when someone says, wait, you told me about $2,000 I was getting.
Well, see, and that's why I've said this a number of times. It's only for building. If planning is able to do what we're suggesting on an expedited process, that just adds another possibility. And Julie has pointed out many times this last 15 minutes, this is only one option. I think Adam, he's going to bring a plethora of other options to look at. So you'll have different things to look at to see what really fits for Jefferson Parish.
And on that point, Peter's point, sometimes you go through the electrical and you get that situation, and now it triggers a plumbing change. So now you pay for the electrical expedition.
Right.
But then now, because of the changing in the electrical, something has to move on the plumbing side.
That's a possibility where that could happen. And that change is a change. That's no matter where you're at. If you make a change, it always has a domino effect. That may even affect planning because you punched out a building, now you're taking up more of a footprint.
So it's really a gamble if you.
Yes and no. As I mentioned already, when you have a master plan and you have these other already approved plans and something's stuck, it goes through rather quickly. Or you have a specific, somehow you got through planning and engineering quickly, and you want to move on getting this done quicker, not holding up for the 5 to 10 days that we're holding you up. This works as well.
And I think Mark glossed over this, but I want to emphasize this expedited construction plans review is when you have a project that has a limited number of review comments need to be addressed. your plans need to come in pretty darn near ready to go, ideally on the first round. This expedited plans review, particularly in Houston, is cleaning up those last few comments quickly to get your permit out the door. It is not, if you applied for a project and your plumbing drawing was missing half of the detailed information needed for comprehensive review, that is not necessarily going to be eligible for this expedited review. So that's where it's going to be incumbent upon the design professionals to present as complete a set of drawings for that first initial review as possible, so that if this expedited review becomes an option, it truly is those last few details needed to get you out the door. If you don't get those revised drawings in a timely manner, those are the things that will make this pointless in some way, because it is an equal expectation between the parish staff and the design professionals that we're both coming to the table ready to get this project out the door.
So there's only a finite amount of projects that are going to fit in that box, right? Because, you know, if you've got CPC, you've got muck, or you've got any kind of buffer or landscape issue, it's not.
I think this is primarily going to be focused on the single-family residential, where infrastructure is not necessarily something that needs to be addressed. Tenant build-outs will be a huge benefit of this kind of process. So yes, just recognition that this is not the fix for all of our permitting issues, but for those that it can help expedite and save those 3 or 4 days, it's certainly something that we will continue.
Tenant build-outs would be, you know, something that was, you know, it's a building item. It, you know, you're going through a multi-tenant facility.
Yeah, and in a lot of cases, you know, from a commercial standpoint, we're dealing with out-of-state companies, national companies. And I just have a question. If a company is coming in and he is going to build out a space that was previously occupied by another tenant, and his use is the same as the other tenant's use, he submits all of his plans and specifications and whatnot to permitting, right? Okay, and permitting gets those electronically, and who monitors when it gets there, who's looking at it, and what supervisors are scrutinizing what you have received to make sure that it is in compliance with your requirements for documentation? Does that process take 10 days? Does it take 3 days? Because I've had experience with permitting and planning where I've talked to an employee in those departments handling the file, and I've been told, well, I got to talk to my supervisor about it. Why hasn't the supervisor looked at the case when it's come in? I'm just trying to understand the process. It goes in electronically, and then somebody goes to the electronic vault and pulls it out, I assume, or does a supervisor go to the electronic vault, pulls it, oh, everything is here, I'm going to give that to Susie?
All right, Vince, let me answer.
Sure.
With my 9 weeks of vast experience. Did you answer that, Sal?
Yes. When your project is submitted, the plan review supervisor is the first one to look at your application to see if you have enough information submitted for him to take it in and give it to a plan reviewer to start the review and open it up to everybody. He doesn't accept your project if you don't have enough documents sent in to start a plan review. He's not going to take a half submitted set, you know, and review it. So he'll return it back, tell you why, and then you have to resubmit it again once you fix what was not there. But it's the plan review supervisor is the first one, not a plan reviewer, to look at your application.
Does the supervisor get an email, or does it just pop up on his?
Now, it goes in a queue. All projects come in my permit now queue. Every morning he gets in there, and during the day, but when he gets in there first thing in the morning, he goes through that queue that people submitted all through the night and late in the evenings, He goes in there, he looks at, and he opens up everyone, looks at the documents, looks at everything, and then he either returns them or he puts a plan reviewer's name to start reviewing it. For that reviewer, when he gets to, ready to work, he
But
looks at it and
it's incumbent upon him to go look, right? He doesn't get an alert, doesn't get an email, doesn't get a notification.
No, it's incumbent upon him to open up the queue every day. All of the projects that are submitted go in the queue, and they just in the order they came in, and he opens it up.
So let me interject at this point to say that, yes, the system does have the possibility for notifications of emails, but what's happening is that they're getting 45 emails in their, it's actually more efficient, Jim, for them to check the queue because the emails, it's just 45 emails in their email system.
No, I understand that.
But yes, there are notification processes in the system, yes.
I guess my point though is that if that, it's much easier to slip through the cracks. Guy's sick, guy's late, guy, whatever. If he's not going to go sit at that computer, then no one's going to know that somebody submitted something today.
No,
That's what he does. That's his job.
But if the supervisor is out, then somebody else is checking the queue. And it's
Right.
not a single person with access to the queue. I can look at the queue on any given day. So it's not that it's one person who solely has that ability to do it. That's one person's primary responsibility, but if they're out for some reason, there are numerous other people who are stepping up and taking on that job of checking.
But there's so many emails being generated that
That's why the queue is actually the more efficient way of processing that rather than emails.
So I submit something, or my customer submits something at 10 o'clock, and a supervisor looks at what's been submitted, and he knows what needs to be, what type of plumbing drawing, what type of this, what type of that. He knows. And if there's something that's missing or doesn't meet the parish's requirements, he sends it back to the person who sent it, and he says, look, your plumbing isn't up to date, you gotta take care of this. So there is no, that day.
No, that's not how it works.
Okay.
All he does is check to see if you sent plumbing drawings. Those plumbing drawings have to, once the job's been accepted, because you sent enough information in, and enough documents in with your plans, he accepts it, and it becomes a permit project. Before that, it's just an application in the queue. Once he accepts it, now a plan reviewer, he assigns a plan reviewer to review your project. When he starts to review it, it opens up for all the departments to review your project. It's been accepted, and it's going to open it up for all the departments to review your project. Okay? So the supervisor's the one that's sent, he don't accept the project, he puts a name on the application, a plan reviewer's name, for that person to open it up and accept it, and then that opens it up for all departments to review.
Okay, so the supervisor that gets the plans, you're the first person that gets the plan, he's the first person that gets the plans. He is not reviewing the plan. All he's saying is, they want to do this, this, and this, I got something for this, this, and this, and then he accepts the application.
No. The application stays an application until the plan reviewer accepts it. What he does is, it's in the queue. All the projects come in, they just line up. He opens this one up, he looks at what you submitted and everything. It's sufficient to start a review. Boom. He puts a name next to that application.
Is that sent to the applicant? Is that?
No, this is all internal.
Okay.
Okay, so then the plan reviewer, he sees his name on it, he opens it up, or she opens it up, and she looks at it, and she says, okay, I accept it. Well, now it's a project number, and you get a notification, your project has been accepted for review. That's it.
And that could all happen in one day.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm confused. The plans go to the planning department or the permitting department, whatever, and there's a supervisor that looks at them. He said there's a
He looks
supervisor
at your
that gets the application.
He's not looking through your
No,
plans.
I hear you. And then you send it to, or the supervisor sends it to assigns it to a plan review. And the plan review person looks at it, but doesn't accept the application?
Well, it's him that's gonna accept it. Once he hits the accept button,
Okay.
it goes out of the application queue, and now it goes as a project.
Okay.
And it gets a permit number.
Okay.
And now it's open. Once he does that, it opens it up for all that would normally be responsible to review. It's supposed to review your plans.
I understand.
He doesn't have to send it to each department.
I
It's all
understand.
that.
So just so that I understand the timeline, if I send it to you and you get it by 10 o'clock,
Right.
and I say you, I don't mean you,
Right.
to the
You
proper
submitted-
department,
you submitted it.
how long does it take before a plan review person recognizes, yeah, it's all in order, whatever, and sends the notification to the applicant?
Okay. Let's say we got 10 projects come in.
All right. In the interest of time, because we
Yeah,
are
we-
already over time.
We're over time. We're gonna have to start with this agenda for the next meetings. Charles.
The planning department is asking for us to have any recommendations on the interim temporary standards into them by October 24th. So we have any recommendation to get it into them. And then we can discuss that at the November meeting. We can also start looking at putting together our recommendations that are for the UDC study and starting to get that formulated and get that into the planning department as well. We also want to start, we're going to have to start wrapping up this committee and starting to put together our recommendations according to the, with our recommendations for permitting and the process. So we're going to have to be thinking about that in our November meeting and maybe breaking into some smaller groups to start discussing on those recommendations and how we're going to be presenting that to the committee.
So what we're thinking is, for the next meetings, is maybe breaking up into separate groups of individuals that have expertise in their fields. You know, so you know, you've got your residential guys that only care about what you can get done and written for the residential part of the code. And then you've got your landowners and your developers that care about a certain amount of items that will be having to discuss their part. And then the planning part of the code for the MUC and CPZ and those issues, we'll have a separate group for that. So I'm thinking maybe 3 groups of like-minded people that we separate into and we brainstorm on a number of topics that are relevant to you. You know, right? We've gone through a bunch of macro scale items. We want to kind of try and consolidate now down to micro. You know, where we're each bringing something to the table.
All right, I'd like to call to adjourn the meeting.
One more thing, sorry, I thought about the macro stuff. I just had some handouts I just wanted to give out, just, you know, because I'm not too much with the detailed stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Hand,
I just wanted to hand it out, yeah.
Start handing them out. That would be
When is the
great.
next meeting?
That would be.
I can go around and somebody just share this picture. Yeah.
You said November 13th?
I believe it's November 13th, because we ran into early voting, I think. So we had to reschedule, it'll be the second Thursday.
Okay. So, yeah, November 13th.